Yo guys, welcome back. It is Ripe again, back with more Pro Revenge. The first story is titled, My parents shamed me in front of my close friends and family, so I shamed them publicly. A bit of backstory. I was raised in a traditional religious household and my beliefs did not coincide with those of my parents. In fact, I did not believe in God at all. I made the mistake of expressing my beliefs to my parents before I was out of the house, so they were constantly looking for ways to get me right with the Lord. This revenge story revolves around one of those attempts. I know this post also shows a more negative side of religion, but I'm not trying to bash anyone's beliefs, I'm just giving my personal experience with some religious people. When I came out as gay to my parents, they were less than understanding. As my mother sobbed about how her son was going to burn in hell, and my father yelled at me for being so stupid, I realized I probably could have held off on telling them, but the damage was done. My relationship was never quite the same with them after that. Soon after my revelation, my mom took me to see a local pastor to clear my head and basically convince me to just be straight, which was clearly not going to happen. My father wouldn't be caught dead with me on this trip, however, because he was the mayor of our small town, and if word got out about his wayward son's feelings towards men, then his pride would be forever hurt and his public image ruined. That was more than a bit of sarcasm, but I'm not quite sure how that came out through writing. After sitting through my pastor's awkward response to why I should change my sexuality, I went with my mom back home. When we arrived at home, I was greeted by a living room full of my closest friends and family members with somber, pitifying looks. Apparently, my mother had taken it upon herself to organize an intervention to instill religious ideals into me. When she sat me down and spoke to me in slow, careful words about how everyone here cared about me and was here to help me with my little problem, I was beyond mortified. I sat and listened as those I cared most about in the world shit out Christian cliches and Bible verses telling me I would face God's wrath. When I finally was released to my room, I could barely contain my embarrassment and anger at my parents for humiliating me like that and refusing to accept me. I later figured out that my dad was pretty upset with my mom for telling people about my sexuality, but he eventually came to terms with it since all of them swore up and down to tell no one. However, I knew he was really angry that his beautiful reputation might be ruined, not that I was emotionally shit on. After this, my relationship never quite mended with my parents, but luckily I was already a senior and ready to go to college. I got accepted to a university pretty close to my hometown that was quite accepting and actually up to date with modern thinking, so that was good. I joined the college's campus pride club and became pretty involved in pride walks and events, and an opportunity presented itself to me that was too good to pass up. A pride rally was being held at my local town that I could attend, so I knew what had to be done. Now, just because I'm gay doesn't mean I dress in rainbows and tiaras all the time, but that's not what my parents thought. The stigma associated with being gay in my town was so exaggerated and homophobic that it was almost laughable, so I dressed up in the goofiest, shortest, rainbowiest clothes that I could find to really drive the point home. I got as many of my campus pride friends to join in the local rally as well, so the turnout was a bit bigger than expected for the event. When I finally got there, I walked all up and down the main streets, down my own block, and even past my dad's place of business and town hall. Since my hometown is pretty small, most people know each other, so I got plenty of scandalized looks and petty little gasps from people I had met. But the cherry on top came when the local news station came to report on the event. Now, the reporters were technically interviewing random people, but I was more than a bit pushy in getting my own interview. I got to wave my flag, say my statements, and basically flaunt my sexuality on what would later become a brief report on the local news. I bet my dad enjoyed seeing that broadcast all over town while sipping his morning coffee. And as if this was not sweet enough already, I actually saw my dad a couple times during the rally. Since much of the rally was centered around Town Hall, it was fitting for the mayor to at least make an appearance, and he got a nice good look at me. The look of disgust and almost fear at what was being done to his precious reputation is one that I will cherish forever. After I was done doing damage, I headed on back to my college. It turns out that my dad did not get elected to office again that year and even issued a half-hearted apology for his son's actions. Maybe next time he opens a Bible, he should read the chapters on love and forgiveness. Lord knows he needs it. And here there's actually a comment in the thread that is very fitting, posted by Broken Pigeon 123. Reading the Bible and thinking the main message is that gays are bad is like reading Harry Potter and thinking the main message is don't date Asians. Let's move on to the next story, which is from r/Nuclear Revenge. Nuclear Revenge is similar to Pro Revenge, just more extreme. This story actually also applies to r/Treelaw. I was told this belonged here. A woman tries to destroy my orchard, I destroy her life. Well, let's start a few years in the past. My great-grandparents planted an orchard and it is now at least 120 years old. My grandparents and my parents were really proud of the peach trees growing in it and did their best to keep them in good health and well. We always threw a big party when the peaches were ready to be harvested and invited all of our friends and neighbors to it. I loved those parties. The neighbors on the property to the south of our orchard were particularly fond of our peaches. They were a bunch of fine old people, and me and the old man, Sam, were pretty good friends. He taught me a lot about woodworking with hand tools only, and we had some great evenings in his workshop and we finished many a good whiskeys in there together. In return, he got a lot of fine peaches, marmalade, homemade peach liquor, etc. Sadly, he died a good 10 years ago. Cancer is a real a-hole. His wife followed soon after, and many suspected it was of a broken heart. They had no kids, so all of their property was left to the state except his tools and whiskey collection, which he had gifted me a few weeks before he died. In comes Karen. The name speaks for itself. Haircut, attitude, and being obnoxious. The whole deal. She bought the property of my late neighbors. We had not had the kind of money to buy it at that time, as we had met some dire straits the years before and all our savings were gone. The first thing she did before she actually moved in was to go round and making demands of the neighbors on the surrounding properties. When it was finally our turn to listen to her gibberish, she told us that we needed to remove half of the trees as the leaves were blowing on her property. We told her in a polite way that we won't comply to her demands, as the orchard is a vital part of our family heritage, tradition and life, and has been there for at least 120 years. She was pretty pissed, but did nothing for the time being. There are some things you need to know before I continue with the story. The workshop I mentioned before was situated right at the border to our property. It was a small timber framed building at least 160 to 180 years old. The regulations in my state are pretty strict concerning old structures. Every structure over 100 years is protected and you need a special permission to tear it down. Failing to get this permission can lead to a hefty fine. To get the permission to build a new building, it has to be up to code and you have to ask your surrounding neighbors, and if they agree, you are good to go. Except there's one speciality in my county. You have to keep a certain distance to the border of the property to allow emergency services full access to your property. If one of these requirements is not met, the building is illegal, or at least only partially legal, and can actually be ordered by the court to be torn down. That might come in handy later. So, back to my Karen. After our first encounter with her, she did her best to pester the whole neighborhood. She got the neighbor's dog put down because he allegedly attacked her brat. It later turned out she faked the attack and the dog was the sweetest and most innocent dog you could imagine. A Bernese mountain dog big but a real teddy bear. Anyways, she later got us to stop doing our annual peach parties, as she called the police every time for various reasons. Noise complaints, and we had a band playing there in the afternoon. Arson, we lit a fire in a designated fire pit in the middle of our property. She called the ATF on us, allegedly making moonshine, even though my dad had a license to distill for our own consummation. In short, she was a real pain in the bum, and after 3 years we decided it was not worth it to deal with various officers and law enforcement agencies every time we threw the party, and we decided to quit. After she had reached this goal, she resorted to pestering us to remove the orchard. We did not cave in, and some things started to get really fishy. Somehow, the tires of our trucks got slashed, eggs got thrown on our farmhouse, our cat disappeared and surfaced a few days later in pretty rough condition. It looked like somebody had actually tried to cut his tail off. Don't worry, he healed up completely, but we actually could not prove that she did all that. Then came the day she made her biggest mistake. She had a company come in a sort of secret operation and tear down the old woodworking workshop overnight. 2 days later, they started building a big garage/recreational center and house right where the shop was, but she missed one fine detail which got pretty important later on. She did not ask for our permission nor for the neighbors. A short while after, the trees right next to her property started to get sick. The leaves turned brown in the middle of the summer and the branches started to die. We lost 4 trees before we figured out the cause. Somebody had driven along copper nails into them. We had a suspicion, but we could not prove it. So we put up some trail cameras, perfectly legal, as it was on our own property. And we caught her red-handed. My dad confronted her, she apologized, and my dad, being the way too nice guy he is, wanted to let her get off the hook. But not me. The nail she drove into our oldest tree was the final nail to her coffin. So I started to investigate. I had some friends at the administration of our county and asked them to do some inquiries. It turned out she has not applied for permission to tear down the old shop nor for permission to build a new building. I further did some inquiries on the borderline of our property. Turned out the old markers vanished over time and her building was about 3 feet on our property. After I had gathered all this information, I presented it to my parents. At first they were reluctant as they did not want to start a neighborhood clash. But after I recalled all the things she did to us and our neighbors, they were in. So let the games begin. First, we called the authorities on her for tearing down a protected building and presented them with all the evidence we gathered. Then, we called the building authorities on her for building a building without permission, not up to code, and not only did she not keep the required distance to the property border, she also built on our property without our permission. Long story short, it turned out the workshop has not only been protected because of its age, but also because it was a historical landmark which played a vital role in a conflict back in the 1860s. She got sued for this and had to pay a fine of an equivalent of about $150,000. She further had to demolish her newly built building, costing an additional $50,000, got fined for this too, which is now about $83,000, and had to rebuild the workshop on her own expense, which was another whopping $154,000, as it had to be period correct up to the smallest detail. This means it had to be built with the correct materials, with hand tools only, and to the correct dimensions. As you can imagine, paying professionals to build quite a large timber-framed building only by hand gets pretty expensive pretty fast. So, all in all, it cost her an equivalent of $437,000 plus further expenses as lawyers, etc. And this caused her to go bankrupt, so she had to sell the property in the end. Which then my parents bought, by the way. Last I heard of her was that she moved back to the big city. Karen, that's what you get for interrupting the peach parties. But seriously, that was a very satisfying crossover of nuclear revenge and tree lore. Anyway guys, that's all the revenge content I got for you today. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please like the video and subscribe to my channel to show that you want to see more of this. So I hope you have a great day, and I see you later today for our new episode of r/entitled people.